All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks everyone for joining. It's our webinar on understanding Infor OS as STS. It'll be a quick knowledge transfer and then open it up for any roundtable discussion or questions you might have towards the end. A pretty basic agenda for us here today. Really just the what, why, and how of Infor STS. So what exactly is the product, what's changing, why you might be interested in it, and what you can do about it or how we can implement it. This webinar should only probably take about 15 or 20 minutes, so it won't be the full normal 1 hour allotment. We'll walk through the content and then open it for questions towards the end. First, a little bit about Intellius. We are headquartered in Dallas, Texas. We've been in the Infor space since 1999 and are also an Infor Alliance partner. We offer a variety of services both on the technical side and application side for the Infor applications. We also help with Lawson and Infor upgrades, offer a number of cloud services, and then also have some traditional software offerings you may have heard of in the past, such as the benefit add-ins and job automation products. So to start, what exactly is Infor STS? This is a product that's bundled with the Infor OS technology stack. Another name for that you may have heard would be Mingle 12. So it's a technology stack that includes much more than just Mingle, but if you're running Mingle Foundation or Mingle 11 on-premise today, this would be the next iteration or version of that product. Infor STS is an alternative to ADFS. So Infor mandated a move to ADFS as of March of 2019. At that time, and actually up until October of last year, October of 2019, ADFS was the only option for on-premise Lawson customers. Infor STS is an alternative and another option to ADFS to satisfy that authentication requirement. Infor STS in and of itself supports multiple authentication mechanisms for your Infor products. Infor STS can be used both as a service provider to work with external IDPs or as its own independent identity provider. So why would you upgrade to Infor STS or why would you implement STS? Well, if you're still on the LS as STS or Lawson Security as a security token service, that's no longer supported. Infor dropped support for that, as I mentioned earlier, in the spring of 2019 and mandated a move to another authentication protocol. At the time, they were recommending ADFS, and again, at this point, Infor STS is another option for you. Infor STS really is about giving the customer more options at this point. So maybe you were reluctant or hesitant to move to ADFS. Maybe you were interested in other identity provider solutions like Azure or Okta, PingFederate, things like that. At the time, that wasn't an option. There were quite a few constraints with ADFS, particularly around how the architecture was meant to be supported, different version dependencies, and things like that. So with Infor STS, again, it's all about options. So we can implement Infor STS as a service provider. What that would mean is integration with other IDPs or identity providers is now supported. You're no longer forced to use ADFS. ADFS is certainly an option, even some of the newer versions like ADFS 5 and ADFS 4. But we can also now open the door to other IDP solutions like Azure, Okta, PingFederate, or any other enterprise identity providers you may have rolled out in your organization. I think this is a big win for customers. We've done a number of the ADFS conversions, and pretty much on every one of them, there's some pushback or questions that come from the network and infrastructure team asking questions around another solution they may already have rolled out and why Lawson can't integrate with that. Infor STS now gives you that opportunity. Infor STS can also act as an identity provider itself. So this would be kind of going back to that traditional LDAP bind method for authentication, for example. So maybe you don't want to roll out an ADFS, or maybe you have multiple user repositories, maybe a large field population or external users who you don't have in your corporate Active Directory. ADFS requires users to be in a corporate Active Directory. With an LDAP bind through Infor STS, we can actually bind to another LDAP solution and support multiple user repositories for authentication. Another thing to note is that, this is a newer version of Mingle, so to speak, Mingle 12, but adoption of Infor OS brings that Cloud Suite technology stack to your on-premise environment. I think this is beneficial. It gives you some exposure to the newer technology. Depending where, V11 or Cloud Suite applications, whatever you want to call them, are on your roadmap, this gives you a little taste and exposure to the exact same technology stack and front-end UI and experience that you would get in a cloud-based environment with Infor. And another thing to note with this is that direct integration with ADFS is still supported. Infor STS is optional, so you can't be on LS's STS anymore, but if you move to ADFS to be compliant, that's still a totally fine configuration and it's still supported. Infor STS would be something to evaluate and potentially move to if you're interested in integrating with another type of identity provider solution. I think in summary, for the why, it's just improved flexibility and more options for you as a customer in using Infor STS over the ADFS direct integration solution. I wanted to provide a quick list of supported identity that you can integrate with. This is really not an all-inclusive list, and it is specific to on-premise deployments, but just some examples of proven integrations that have worked with the technology stack. So again, Microsoft ADFS, still supported, still viable, but you'll notice other options on there. A couple of the popular ones on the top, I mentioned Azure AD, PingFederate, Okta, and a number of other solutions. Pretty much any SAML 2.0 based identity provider can be set up and integrate with Infor STS when it's acting as a service provider. Specific configurations and setup may vary, but just because a solution you may be curious about isn't on this list doesn't necessarily mean it can't work. So, what's changing on the user experience? This saying was true with ADFS, and it's still true with Infor STS. When we make that change, it's really a change to the authentication process. So how do you log in? How do you access the application? All of the authorization and all the core Lawson applications still remain the same. Your Lawson security model is the same. Your roles are the same. Your classes, your rules. The underlying application source code is the same. This is really just changing the authentication layer. But obviously, from a user experience point of view, when you log into the application via your browser, you do need to log in. So it is going to impact the user experience to some extent. When you directly integrate with an external identity provider, that particular login screen will display automatically. So in the top left and the top right of this quadrant, you could see this would be a direct integration with ADFS. If you're already using ADFS today, this should look familiar. Or on the right top quadrant, this would be an integration with Azure AD. So we can directly authenticate with Azure, and users would be passed to authenticate there, providing SSO with any other applications and may be leveraging that for authentication. Infor STS also supports an optional home realm discovery. So what that would mean, if you look in this bottom left quadrant here, this is an example where I've set up my particular sandbox with two different identity providers. And an example like this might be a good use case for someone who has a corporate user base and potentially a field or external user base accessing self-service applications. So I named one ADFS, and that's pointing to my internal ADFS server or my corporate ADFS network. And then I also have an LDAP that may be pointing to an external user repository. This user experience is, can be configured and tailored. The icons can be changed, the names can be changed based on what you see fit, but it gives you the option to allow users to choose and opt in to authenticate with whatever process works for them. So it does support multiple realms or multiple IDPs for authentication. And then in the bottom right, that would be what the built-in authentication, if you're using, for example, kind of that traditional LDAP bind method with Infor STS, you get that traditional Infor login page that That's consistent across a lot of the products now, even, you know, like the Infor Concierge and Extreme sites. You're integrating with that type of experience. So these are all different configurations and different options, and what you choose and how you configure the product will ultimately drive what the front-end user experience is for your users. But ultimately, the key takeaway is there's really a number of options here. So what's the migration path? First and foremost, the product is Infor OS as STS. So Infor OS is required. To start this initiative, you would need to install the Infor OS technology product. That can really be classified as an upgrade to quote-unquote Mingle 12 if you're running Mingle 11 Foundation today. This is typically done as a side-by-side upgrade. So you would procure and provision additional infrastructure and new servers to support it. They would be set up side-by-side as not to interrupt current end-user operation in your Mingle 11 environment. We would configure and install onto those servers and then cut over whenever you're ready to go live. Once those servers are stood up, that's when we can begin the configuration of Infor STS. That can either be with an external IDP, like ADFS or Azure, Okta, et cetera, or that LDAP direct integration that we had mentioned as well. That's another option. Once we have our Infor STS set up, we would then update our Infor applications to actually integrate with Infor STS. So that could be a configuration, which would obviously be required, potentially patching or updating to satisfy any prerequisites, whatever that may be, and the number of applications may change depending on what exactly your organization is using as it pertains to the Infor environment. What does that timeline look like? This is really kind of a rough estimate based on what we've seen out in the field. The typical project duration is anywhere from 1 to 2 months. Obviously, we can get longer than that depending on the number of environments, other project activities, resource availability, et cetera. But I think the 1 to 2 month timeline is realistic and reasonable to estimate kind of generally. Environments can be configured in 1 to 4 days. And when we use the word environment, I would refer, we have like LSF and Landmark and Mingle, et cetera. Really, the word environment here refers to the entire set of applications within a, for example, production or non-production environment. We would work on one set of the servers or one environment at a time, and all the total configuration for that environment set can be done in 1 to 4 days, depending on really the scope of effort, what other updates or configurations may need to be made. Kind of depends on where you're at today with your current loss and deployment. If you're still using LS as STS, plan for an implementation at the longer end of that estimated duration. If you're already using ADFS, you're in a very good place. You've already built the foundation. You already have the structure set in place to handle this type of authentication. There is some minimal reconfiguration required, however. So moving to Infor STS is a supported path, is fairly easy, but there is going to be minor rework and reconfiguration that would be required to get you up and running. Some considerations. So Infor OS, again, is required. This product is bundled with the Infor OS technology stack. You need to have Infor OS running in order to leverage it. Again, Infor OS is the, really kind of the Mingle 12, if you will. Infor OS may require additional licensing. There is a light version available that can be, made available via a license swap, potentially. But you will need to work with your Infor AE to make this particular product available in your download center for on-premise deployment. It wouldn't have previously been included in any license agreement that you had. Reviewing hardware and server requirements, both for Infor OS or any other infrastructure that may be required to support this initiative. Infor OS is typically done as a side-by-side upgrade, which means we're going to need additional servers and infrastructure to support it that will ultimately replace potentially existing Mingle 11 infrastructure, but you will need to work with your network and infrastructure team to make sure you have those hardware and server requirements satisfied. Take a review of your Infor application inventory. There are a number of prerequisites in order to work with Infor OS as STS. A lot of those prerequisites are pretty high in terms of the latest versions of the cyclical and releases of these products. So take a look at the compatibility matrix and make sure you satisfy all those prerequisites. And if you don't, that's fine. But just make sure the scope of the project includes time to upgrade and patch so that you can meet all of those requirements. And again, just a note, so if you're running Infor OS today, maybe you're familiar with the product and you installed it as part of your ADFS implementation. That's great. You have a really good head start. But you probably need some reconfiguration to make this feature available. When the Infor OS installation is done initially, you have to choose whether or not you use direct ADFS integration or Infor STS integration for the authentication piece. And if you're set up with direct integration with ADFS, it will need to be switched over to Infor STS. I did call out a couple of the highlights from the compatibility matrix here, more for reference. But this is the list of products that are supported, kind of the general Infor product portfolio here you may be running with Lawson. These are going to be the minimum version requirements that you need to run Infor STS. So if you're not yet at one of these and you're interested in Infor STS, again, you're going to need to look at including an upgrade or patch at the environment level, generally speaking, to support that type of integration. One big thing to call out with this is that the Smart Office and Lawson Analytics products, Lawson Analytics is not the same as LBI, it's a separate package, but those two products are not supported with Infor STS. So unfortunately, if you have Smart Office users, Infor STS at this time is not an option to you. You would have to make the decision either to move those Smart Office users to the web-based portal platform or go with the direct ADFS integration instead. Again, this is a reference to the compatibility matrix as of today, but we recommend that you please consult the latest version of Infor Extreme of this document prior to any project kickoff or implementation you may be looking at. That covers the majority of the content I wanted to talk with you today. We again appreciate your time for joining us, and at this time we'd like to open it up for any questions. Either you can unmute your line or reach out to Chad Mitchell in the chat or respond in the chat feature with any questions you may have. Again, my name is Rob Flannery. I'm the Director of Services here at Intellius. If there's anything else that comes up after the call, my email's here, and you can feel free to reach out there as well.
So, Rob, we have one question. This is Chad. Should Mingle 12 and STS be installed in Infor OS? And if we choose LDAP route, do we have to sync user information between Lawson Security and STS?
So can you repeat the first part of that question? Was it that Infor OS and STS should be installed?
Yeah, should Mingle 12 and STS be installed in Infor OS?
Yeah, they are bundled with Infor OS. So Mingle 12 is actually called the portal component of Infor OS. And Infor STS is another component of Infor OS. So those really can't be separated. They were to be installed with and as part of your Infor OS deployment on the same server.
Okay.
And then in terms of the synchronization for the LDAP, no, for the authentication, it works just like the bind, I guess, where it calls out and requests the credential at the time of authentication. But with Infor OS, it has another product that we didn't talk about on this webinar, another feature called Infor Federation Services. That's really kind of your security and user repository for the Infor OS product, and ultimately can also provision accounts down to your other systems like LSF and Landmark. That particular component, really the user management component of Infor OS at the authentication or the authorization level, that will need to synchronize with whatever user repository you're dealing with, either an Active Directory or whatever. Users are pulled into there and assigned roles for authorization and potentially pushed down for provisioning to other systems.
Okay. All right, so that was on my side. Another one, is the Federation ISS going away?
Yes, that is a good question. So technically by the book right now, the implementation of Infor STS, Infor guides the customer through a process to actually unfederate the LSF and landmark environments. The idea being the tool I just talked about, Infor Federation Services, or IFS, is used as the provisioning portal, and it can, based on synchronization with, for example, Active Directory, push user accounts to LSF and landmark for auto provisioning and integration with Active Directory. So yes, the federation, traditional federation, if you will, between LSF and landmark is going away with this type of technology, and ultimately, potentially in the future, it seems.
Great. Okay. All right. Any other questions from anybody else? Well, awesome. Well, you got Rob's email address up there. You can reach out to him directly, and if you have any others. And we appreciate everybody for joining us today, and hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks.